what would be the 3 largest obstacles that might stop us from hitting the deadline? I didn't say what difficulties are you having. I used the illustrate before you investigate principle. So the first thing I did was I illustrated my understanding that the client hasn't been the easiest and we're juggling schedules. That's a face-saving excuse built into the question. Then instead of saying what difficulties are you having, now it is, what are the 3 obstacles that could stop us from hitting the deadline? I'm talking about obstacles. I'm not talking about you, which now makes it infinitely easier for you to open up and be honest. And I don't care if you give me 3 obstacles or you give me 1. If you give me anything that says, yeah, we might have difficulty with, now we can solve the problem together.
So welcome to Escape the CEO Doom Loop, the show where we talk with real-world leaders about breaking the patterns that keep their companies and their teams stuck. I'm John Nikovich, joined by my co-host Glenn Dahl.
Our guest today has a really interesting professional journey. Michael is a certified forensic interviewer. He's the president of Quaive, and he's the author of The Disciplined Listening Method. And I first met Michael about a year ago, I believe, right, Michael? And Michael, I saw Michael speak at a business event, and I was really, really struck. First of all, Michael, you've got some really interesting stories from your previous career, which informs what you're doing now. But the thing that really struck me was the fact about how most people don't tell the truth, right? And especially when we're talking to our boss, we definitely don't tell the truth. Why? Because we're telling people what we think they want to hear, not the truth. And I know that it's a really huge basis, I think, for CEOs who listen to our podcast to really understand that concept. So I'd love to drill down into that a lot today, talking about how you believe this works in leadership today and for CEOs, but also would just love to hear some more of those really interesting stories from your career and anything else you want to talk about.
Well, I'm grateful for you guys having me today. I'm happy to share.
All right, great. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Michael, a little bit about your background and how you got here.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. If you have any questions, I'm happy to dive deeper. Very long story short, I started out as a special education teacher and baseball coach and thought that would be all I would ever do. Then lo and behold, I had some friends talk me into trying the financial industry, which I'm sure many listeners have had wonderful, successful careers in the financial industry. But after 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days, I decided it wasn't going to be for me. I went back to school to get a business degree. That's a real number, by the way. That 2 years, 1 month, and 2 days is 100% accurate. I went back to school to get a business degree, was juggling part-time jobs to pay the bills. One of them happened to be in security. And then things just sort of got out of control. A part-time job became a full-time job. A full-time job became a managerial job. And then once I hit that managerial level, one of my responsibilities was to identify employees who had made regrettable decisions and encourage them to be completely truthful with me about, or maybe not completely, but mostly, largely truthful with me about what happened and, write it down. And so thankfully, I was very successful in that portion of my responsibilities and started getting sent to formal interview and interrogation training programs. I should stress non-confrontational, rapport-based interview and interrogation training program. Right. And really fell in love with the process that it takes to encourage somebody to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. So I pursued that up to getting my certified forensic interviewer designation, which is the highest designation available in the field. After that, I was recruited by a company called Wicklander-Zulawski and Associates. They're the world leader in non-confrontational interview and interrogation training and advising. I worked with them for a decade. I ran our investigations division, so I was responsible for coordinating all the interrogations we did on a contract basis. And I traveled all over the world, teaching people how to uncover the truth with these rapport-based, face-saving, non-confrontational techniques. Maybe halfway or so through my time with WZ, I started getting asked by business leaders and executive groups to start sharing these techniques with them and teach them how to apply them in their leadership conversations, negotiations, business development conversations, hiring conversations, and more. And it was during that time that I realized that really the best leaders and the best interrogators have the same two core skills, vision and influence, and that we really are solving the same exact communication problems. We're trying to move people from resistance to commitment. So thankfully, I still have a wonderful relationship with the guys over at WZ, and several of us serve on the board for the International Association of Interviewers together. But we agreed that it was time to step away. I started in Quaive. I wrote the discipline listening method, as you mentioned, and now I spend my time serving as an executive resource, really focusing my time with CEOs, sales teams, and HR teams to teach them the techniques really that are necessary to encourage people, like you mentioned, to share the truth so we can unlock hidden value in all of our high impact conversations.
Wow.
Yeah. I know, right?
That's
Isn't that cool?
fascinating. Yeah. I think you're the first person I've ever met, Michael, that has that designation and that area of specialty. So it's cool that you're here to talk about that some more. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, Michael, here's a question we always like to start off with this, set the tone, because as you know, you had me on your podcast a while back, and we've talked about the CEO playbook. You had read that, and that came from work that John and I and a few other colleagues had done, interviewing 72 CEOs around the world, asking them what were their fears, what were their pains, what were their goals, what is their purpose. And one of the things that came out of that research and the data from it was what we now term the CEO doom loop. And it really, we vetted this with our own experiences and our clients' experiences, a lot of CEOs since then, and it's a real thing. And the CEO doom loop, I'll just explain it briefly, it's really where a CEO can get to a certain point in their career in the leadership and running the company, and they can hit some issues and start kind of regressing, right? Instead of being on that growth path, and they start getting back into a negative path, and it can spiral. And one of the things that they can do as a CEO, I think probably goes back to communication, right? So knowing that you know a bit about the CEO doom loop, how do you think the communications patterns can trap leaders in kind of that negative cycle of leadership versus a positive cycle of leadership?
That's a fantastic question. I'll try to keep it short again if I can. I tend to ramble, and then I'm happy to dive in a little bit more if you want. But I love to try to put that in two categories if we can. And the first one is our internal conversation. I coach a lot of youth sports. Thankfully, I've got the opportunity. My son allows me to do it. Every season I ask him, he says it's okay. It's what he wants. But one of the things that we try to instill in the kids is the most important voice you'll ever hear is your own. And anything you tell yourself you can do, you will. And anything you tell yourself you can't, you won't. I'm starting out a conversation for CEOs by talking about coaching 7-year-old kids, but it's a complete parallel that all too often when we start to get overwhelmed, when we all start our businesses, whether we start them or whether we're promoted in or we're hired from the outside, however it works, we all have doubts. If anybody says they don't have doubts, they're lying to us, right? They might be stronger or smaller depending on where we are, but we all have them. Then at some point we work through them, we overcome them, we put them aside. But like at any time in life, when adversity rears its ugly head, which it will, now it starts breathing life into some of those doubts and some of those gremlins again. So when it comes to communication in the doom loop, one of the things that we can all learn is how do we recognize when we're heading down that negative, unhelpful internal communication, and then look for ways to break the pattern. And sometimes ways to break the pattern aren't necessarily by like working harder or doing the business thing. Like, do we focus on something outside? Is it our physical health? Is it our exercise? Is it our relationship help with our wife, with our partners, with our kids? Is it a hobby? Do we need to go do something else? Do we read different books? Maybe not the business books we're always reading, but do you pick like a personal interest book and just read it? So that way you're breaking the pattern. You're breaking the mental framework that we've been in to start breathing some life, breathing some confidence, breathing some fresh air. Sure, meditation can help. Sure, physical exercise. All of these things are great. Natural sunlight, all of these things can be helpful. But the first one is really break the pattern and recognize that our minds go exactly where our mind's eye takes us. So breaking that pattern, I think from the outside, it's also careful who are we speaking to and who are we listening to? So, I mean, we all know and we've heard that social media is echo chambers, right? And the algorithm dictates what we hear. So if we continue to search certain things, well, the algorithm is going to assume that's all we want to know about. And it's going to continue to pour that on top of us, which might not be helpful. Also, if we continue to seek advice or share ideas with the same people, does their advice feed into the loop? Does their story feed into the loop? Are they somebody who's really listening and trying to help? Or are they someone that just tries to talk to us about all the adversity they've been through and how miserable they've been, which they think is helpful, but it's just making us feel worse and causing us to get deeper into the misery that we're feeling as well. So I think in either end, really understanding the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and they can be a balance of long and short term, in breaking patterns. You've done the research, you know better than me, but the more we can look to break our communication patterns, the more we can look to breathe new life and new opportunities and break us out of that loop sooner than we otherwise may have been able to.
That's fascinating. Wow. You're talking here about the ability to overcome adversity, right? When I hear you talk at the foundation, it's life is kicking the teeth a lot. And what do you do, right, to make that happen? It's really funny. Like, I couldn't agree with what you're saying more. I've been a youth coach for a lot of years, and I will tell you that experience has helped me be a better business leader and a better coach of CEOs. I agree with you 100%. I think the mindset thing that you talk about is so true. I'll never forget this when my son, who was a baseball player and he played in high school, and one of the things that I talk to him about all the time is that if you think that you can't hit a left-handed hitter that throws a fastball 90 miles an hour, don't get in the box, because you're not going to hit that guy that throws 90 miles an hour in the box. You have to have this belief that I can do that. And you're exactly right. So I can talk myself into it. I can talk myself out of it. I really love where you're going with that. So when you're talking about breaking the patterns and kind of what I would say almost reframing yourself, what are some of the things that you really think about around kind of that reframing? It's almost like compartmentalizing a bit, right? That negativity, that self-doubt, which we see show up in the CEO Doom. There's definitely that kind of activity. What are some of the things you think that you need to do to reframe effectively?
We could do a whole hour on the benefits of being a youth sports coach, doing it the right way, and the benefits that not only has for the kids, but for us.
I agree.
And I say this and people think I'm joking, but there's times I'll be working with CEO groups similar to how we met Glenn, and someone will say, "Hey, how'd you learn to manage a CEO group like this?" And I'll say, "Coaching T-ball." And they'll laugh like it's a joke, but it's not. Literally, coaching 4-year-olds helped me coach CEOs. But to get back to your question, when we talk about the reframing and the mental aspect of it, I'm going to go out on a pretty solid limb and say CEOs are there for a reason. They've earned that opportunity. Previous education, previous success, previous experiences have set them up for this opportunity. And maybe it's not, it's not one for one. It's not an exact match, but where they've been has set them up to be here now. And when we think about overcoming adversity, or even if we think about change, when you look at influence and persuasion and change management and these kinds of things, one of the things that we find is that if you try to get somebody to change direction or start from scratch with no inertia, both of those things are very difficult. So if I'm saying to somebody, you've been walking forward for 3 days, now it's time to turn around and go the other way. Well, why do I want to do that? I've been walking this way for 3 days. But if I can help them understand that they've already been here, they've already done it. It's like, I have, I can, I will. Now I can use the direction they're traveling to help them realize that they've been through adversity, better, equal, worse, whatever it has been. And the lessons that they've learned there apply to where they are now. So it's not an about face. It's not a change of direction. It's not starting from scratch. It's in some way, shape, or form, we've been here before. We've problem solved before. We've rode through the storm before. So now how do we capitalize on those lessons in order to go in the direction we've been going? Now, we might need to deviate, like maybe forward isn't the right direction anymore, but we're not going to turn around. We're going to continue moving forward and then start changing the angle, changing our opportunity. So any of this is making sense, it's not about creating a stop and reset, a stop and go. It's about helping people recognize that they've built a skill set, that they have the experiences, they have the perspectives, they have resources that they can rely on in order to make this incremental improvement, these incremental adjustments. And then I'll wrap it up with this, John. Welcome to additional questions and feedback. Is make sure we're pointing out the incremental adjustments, improvements. Because a lot of times, as you both know, when we're in the middle of it, we don't feel the change. We don't feel the improvement.
Yeah.
But from the outside looking in, especially from the roles that you two play, you can see whether culture is changing, attitudes are changing, performance is changing, financials are changing, markets changing, processes are changing. Incrementally, you can start to see that. So now by calling it out, it builds the confidence, it builds the momentum, and now we can start moving in a new productive direction.
Yeah. So it's really the recognition, right, that you're making progress. Somebody's saying, hey, that's great work. Here's where you were. And here's things that I see that you're doing differently. It's that you're talking about. Yeah.
I don't know if you do this with your clients. I've been doing it since I read the book, The Gap in the Gain. Michael, are you familiar with that book, The Gap in the Gain by Dr.
I'm
Benjamin
familiar.
Hardiman?
I'll confess I haven't read it, but I am familiar.
Yeah, the concept is exactly what you're talking about. I think it's what you're talking about. It's like if we have a goal and we're headed towards the goal, we tend to always focus on how far we're not, or the distance between us and the goal still remaining, and don't take enough time to recognize and reward for the gain that we've had along the journey. And so with my clients, I'll frequently introduce this exercise, and it's like, what have we learned since we started this journey together, or since you formed as a leadership team, and get them to recognize, which then gives them confidence to say, okay, as we go forward, if we need to change and deviate on the path, we can build it from the strengths that we've built versus the strengths we don't have yet and what we might need. I've got another question, Michael. It's something you said earlier on. I'd heard once from a sales coach, he always said, it's the person who's doing the talking that is being sold. And I know that you teach that listening is actually persuasion, which really flips how most people think about communication. And I think a lot of leaders fall into this trap, is they think that communication is them talking or telling people what to do. But can you explain on that a little bit more about what that looks like in practice and how leaders can use listening to create clarity and commitment instead of just more noise?
Certainly. Thank you for asking. And in many ways, I believe that our perception as leaders is driven in large part by our perception as listeners. If people believe we're good listeners, they're more likely to believe we're great leaders. If people don't believe we're great listeners, they're very unlikely to believe that we're great leaders. They might believe that we have the operational knowledge, that we're task sufficient. But when it comes to leadership, there's a direct correlation with how we're perceived as listeners. So part of it is creating that perception, of course, but we can think of, especially for people who are impatient and who believe they already know how the movie ends and just want to move on. We've all been guilty to some degree there.
Yep.
Think about listening as data collection, as intelligence collection. So even if I feel like I already know the answer, I should be telling them, we should be moving on. This is 5 minutes of my life I'm never going to get back.
Oh, I've never felt that way.
Yeah. There is something that we are learning every time we listen. So if we think about listening as a persuasive act, when we listen to somebody else, they start to believe that we care. They start to believe that they're important. They start to believe that they have value. They start to believe that they have a contribution to offer. And the more they feel that, the more they open up. So as you started off earlier talking about, which is so true, anytime somebody is talking to a leader, most especially the person at the top of the org chart, they are more likely to defend or protect their self-images than they are to tell us the entire truth, because they know everything they share with us has potential consequences. So I'm not saying that they're going to outright lie, but they're going to be real careful and strategic about what they tell us and when they tell us and how they tell us, because there's potential consequences associated with that. So if I want someone to lower their guard, I need to make it okay for them to talk. And the best way to make it okay for them to talk, to your point, is to not say anything. And yeah, we can get back to active listening, which honestly is performative listening. that yes, if I maintain reasonable eye contact and smile and nod and give you encouragers and occasionally summarize, that's good. You believe I'm listening because I'm giving you the chance to talk more. But I think everybody listening to this conversation has done that before while completely ignoring whoever was talking to them at the time.
Yeah.
So active listening is important, but it's really performative listening. So now if I do look like I'm engaged, okay, great. But what am I listening for? What type of intelligence? What type of objectives am I looking to achieve? What types of goals am I looking to achieve? What type of relationships am I looking to build? Now, as I'm gathering this intelligence, when it is my turn to speak, to your point earlier, John, I can reinforce anything positive, any solutions that they've come up with. I can give them credit for their ideas. I don't steal their ideas from them. One of the silly things we sometimes say is, great idea. That's exactly what I was thinking. As soon as
I was
say
thinking that too, Michael.
I just stole the idea from you. It's no longer your idea. Just say great idea. Move on. So to your point, Glenn, when we talk about being present or having patience, anytime we have said or done something that we would immediately like to have back, it's because at that moment in time, satisfying our emotions was more important than achieving our long-term goals. So if we can focus enough on the goals we're trying to achieve, relationships, initiatives, outcomes, these types of things, now we can stay patient and stay present because this time we have together has value. And now that it has value, I can listen and engage in a way where you feel like you're in control of this conversation. You feel like you're adding value. You feel like you have purpose. And now I can ask fewer questions. I'm going to have to chase you down more often. We're going to have fewer gaps in communication or misunderstandings because of the precedent I set through our communication. I'll wrap up with this. People will interpret how we communicate with them as proof of how much we respect them. If we're talking over them, it doesn't show respect. If we're quiet and we're listening, it does.
Yeah.
Do you have an example, like a story from your previous career that kind of illustrates that point where how you learned to use it?
Oh, for sure. I'll do maybe a surprising one because I think when people think about investigative stories, they think about the criminal. And I got plenty of those. I can share. I don't want to disappoint people. We can get to one of those. But here's potentially a surprising one. I was called to an investigation. Very long story short, a company did an employee survey, and one employee on one survey said there's another employee committing fraud. So no names, no examples, no details. Like that was it. Somebody here is committing fraud and you don't know. That's what it said on the survey. So the CEO calls and says, this is what we got. Come down and figure it out. Awesome. So I fly down to them and I'm interviewing a woman who on the surface shouldn't be one of the suspects, but she is abnormally nervous and uncomfortable and is getting more abnormally nervous the longer the conversation goes on. Generally, if somebody starts kind of nervous, but they're not responsible for anything wrong, they tend to get less nervous over time. Not always, but most of the time. This one was going the other way. So I'm like, well, what's going on here? So I use a few different interviewing techniques. And now I'm confused because I am pretty certain that she's not my fraudster. But the level of nerves and discomfort just isn't lining up for me. Then it hits me like a brick. I bet she's the one who filled out the survey. She's not doing it. She knows who. So now I really had to use our bread and butter interrogation technique, not to get her to confess, because I don't think she did anything wrong. I need her to tell me who the fraudster is.
Yeah.
So now as she's talking to me, I'll admit there was a span of a couple of minutes where I probably really wasn't listening to her. Because I'm trying to replay the conversation in my mind and say, okay, based on all the discomfort I've seen from her, why do I think she's so uncomfortable? And what does she need to experience from me in order to break through this? So I ask her a few more questions, give her just kind of some general scenarios. And I'm convinced at this point that she probably knows the person and is a little bit worried about being responsible for getting that person in trouble. And she doesn't want to get in trouble for not saying anything sooner.
Okay.
So I build that into the interrogation process that we use. Sure enough, She breaks down a little bit and tells me that she does know that there's a person here committing fraud. She knows who it is, and she has evidence. I like evidence, and I like having it in my possession. She refused. It was in her desk. So one of the hardest things I had to do was help create a plan. It sounds like TV show stuff, but it was kind of silly. So we came up with a plan where I was interviewing almost all the employees that day. So there's no secret I was there and what I was talking about. So we came up with a plan where she was going to go to her desk, and she had one of those old school daily calendar planners. She would go to her desk, get that, slide the evidence into her planner, and bring it back to me under the guise of helping retrace her schedule.
Okay.
Worked. She brought it back, and the next morning we were able to interview the culprit, and not only encourage the culprit to tell us the truth about the fraud he was committing, but he was also working for one of their direct competitors and sharing trade secrets as well. So oftentimes when you think about using these interview skills, we think about the criminal, somebody who did something they weren't supposed to. But in reality, when somebody confesses, they are sharing sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. If you run an organization, every single time you talk to somebody, you are putting them in a vulnerable situation, and therefore the information you're asking is by definition sensitive. Maybe not to you, but to them, because they see potential consequences for giving you the information. So once we realize that, really, anytime we're asking somebody to share a secret or to tell us something they're hesitant of, they've got to jump through the same mental hoops that a suspect does in an interrogation. And those same credibility, face-saving, influential approaches that we take apply across the board.
That's fascinating.
It's a great story. Thanks for sharing that.
I'd love to take it up a little bit. So you wrote this book called The Disciplined Listening Method. I'd love to understand, why'd you write it? Who's the audience you wrote it for? And I see lots of different applications that we started talking already. There's tons of different applications, but if you help our listeners and myself kind of understand it, kind of what was the genesis of the book and who's it really for?
I appreciate you asking. I laugh. I wrote it because I ran out of options. Kind of had to. I got backed into a corner. But really, besides the halfway joking but true answer, if I got backed in a corner and I had to, I have been fortunate that coming from the background that I did, I had access to and motivation to pursue information and educated and resources from a wide range of places. So a lot of people, if you come up in leadership, and I'm oversimplifying, but you read a bunch of leadership books.
Yep.
If you come up in sales, you read a bunch of sales books. If you're a negotiator, you read a bunch of negotiation books. So coming up in investigations, it was investigation techniques, trust, influence, persuasion, psychology, negotiation, sales, leadership. Like, if you really want to identify with people, you got to pursue all of these things. And as I did, we were able to start pulling through threads and central ideas. And sometimes we would read a tremendous sales book or leadership book and say, the author would laugh at me if I said this, but she's 9/10 of the way there. If you take this little interrogation piece and you slide it in, now you've got the complete set. This all works together. And so the more I was working with CEOs and with sales leaders and HR leaders, the more it became clear that a resource didn't exist that brought all of these things and perspectives together in one place. So I was a part of really three, but only two. Okay, I'll say three. I was a part of 3 research studies that really made the book a necessity, because now I had the opportunity to put in our research on top of all of the research that we had gathered along the way from all of these other sources. Then, Glenn, to your point, weave in investigation stories, business stories, family stories, sales stories, and put it all together. So, John, the primary audience would be business leaders.
Okay.
But in reality, we were careful to make sure that there's parenting examples in there. There's business development examples in there, negotiation, leadership. Of course, there's interview and interrogation stories in there as well. But it really is, it's the subtitle is how a certified forensic interviewer unlocks value in everyday conversations. And that's really what it set out to do, is to provide the skills, perspectives, and techniques to get below the surface and build the relationships necessary to uncover the information that really matters.
Okay. And one of the concepts, or one of the things that, we've seen pre-notes, is this concept from interrogation to leadership, right? What does that look like? It's interesting when I read that, and as I kind of thought about it, what does that really mean? Because interrogation for me, there's a lot of conflict in that. Obviously, I go to law enforcement as I think about the word interrogation, and then how do you go from, what does that really look like? What does that really mean into leadership? Can you kind of walk us through that a bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. And you bring up a really important and reasonable stereotype about the word interrogation, right? Because most people think about law enforcement. Most people think about what they see on nightly drama television, which makes for wonderful drama, but doesn't work in real life. Or we think about what we see in the news when it goes wrong, right?
Yeah.
Enhanced interrogation techniques, torture, some of these false confessions, these things that we see on the news. So a great interrogation shouldn't feel like an interrogation. It should feel like two people sitting down and having a conversation as relative equals. It just so happens that the conversation ends with one person divulging essentially secrets about regrettable decisions or actions that they had. So when you think about it that way, if I am going to be a successful investigative interrogator, a lot of that comes down to vision and influence. From a vision standpoint, I've got to understand the playing field. I've got to understand my goals. I've got to understand who I need to achieve those goals with. And then I have to influence those people to commit to the process necessary to achieve those goals. Well, that sounds a lot like the role of a leader as well. So we talk about the difference between a manager and a leader, right? And when you get to the leadership role, it's much more about influence. It's about having the vision, sharing the vision, influencing others to commit to that. And in many ways, perhaps surprisingly, great interrogators create unexpected bonds with the people that they interview in really short time under adverse circumstances to allow that bond and relationship to fuel the truth sharing cycle. As leaders, we're often forced to do the very same thing. How do we build bonds with people that might see things differently, have different thoughts, have different experiences, goals, fears, in order to build this common ground moving forward? The robots might change everything. We're all aware of this. But right now, I think it's pretty hard for leaders to be really successful if they can't communicate effectively and influence people along the way. And it's impossible for investigators to be successful if they can't influence people and build those commitments along the way as well. So when you distill it down to that level, at the conversational level, we're doing the exact same thing. We are sitting down and having conversations with people who are likely reluctant to share the critical information we need to make the right decision. So we need to encourage them to share that information to then create the commitment to change behavior in order to achieve our goals.
Okay.
Wow. Michael, this whole topic, it reminds me, I've worked in some large corporations in my career, and we always had what was called a CLM, a career limiting move. And that was when we're in a meeting, all right, and the boss is in the room, usually the CEO, and someone says something that clearly the CEO doesn't agree with, right? That swims against the tide. And it's probably something other people in the room are thinking, and it may very well be the truth, but everybody kind of goes, ooh, right? You get that look and looks down at the table. So if I turn around and I say, I'm a CEO here, and I'm listening to this, I'm thinking like, well, Michael, why do I need to take the time to establish rapport and make people comfortable, to influence them? Why can't I just tell them what to do?
You can. Give it a shot. Let me know how it works out. Let me know how far it gets you. There could be lots of reasons for that. Is it the old command and control doctrine? Is that kind of how they learn? Is that what their models showed them growing up? Is it vulnerability? Like if it looks like I don't know, if it looks like I'm not in control, do people think less of me? Sometimes is it just general fear? If I give up control to somebody else, do I lose my vision? Do I lose control? Do I lose influence? When in reality, and this is probably too bold a statement, and I'm not the hot take guy, I promise, but I would challenge any CEO to prove that they know more about what's going on at the front line of their business day to day than the people at the front line of their business.
Right.
If they do, then they're in the wrong role, because they should be operating at a higher, more strategic level, and they should be relying on the people at the front line to know what's going on, to make the best decision they can and filter up the information and experiences as necessary. So if I'm going to be honest and recognize the disconnect between where I sit and what happens every day in the front line of my organization, then the only way for me to get that information is to encourage people to be comfortable sharing it with me. And time again, we have international examples of this. When CEOs open up about mistakes that they've made, missed opportunities that they've had, any one of these examples, it helps other people relax and open up. Perhaps, and I get this from George Kohlreiser, perhaps the single most important moment we have to build bonds and influence others is when they make mistakes. Because when people make mistakes, they expect to get killed. Like, I'm going to get mowed over for this one. But when we, kind of like what we talked about earlier, John, youth sports, when we pick them up and we encourage them and we help them through those mistakes, now they're going to be less fearful. So they'll be more innovative. They'll be more honest. They'll be more open. So the more CEOs can be honest about their own mistakes and missed opportunities, the more we can pick people up and support them when they make mistakes instead of hammering them for it. Now we're building rapport over the long term to get people to share this information for us. I guess my final argument, if it's necessary, would be this. If you're a CEO listening to this conversation and you say, I don't have time to build rapport with others, I just want to tell them what to do. Well, again, congratulations. But let me ask you this. How many times in the last 6 months have you found out about a piece of information or a situation long after you wish you knew it because you already made a decision?
Right.
That answers at least once. Then we need to do a better job building rapport and making it okay for people to share information, because there is a direct line between the questions we ask and the decisions that we make. I'm willing to bet every leader listening tries to make the best decision available based on the intelligence or information they had available at the time. And they have that information available based on the questions that they ask. So if we're finding out the information we should have had after we needed it, that's not on them. That's on us, because we have set a standard or an expectation of communication that cause people to withhold or choose not to share. We have to own it.
And then the follow-on to that. So then how, if the CEOs listening are saying like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get this, Michael, but why would my people, I've got an open door policy. We're really open here. Great culture. Why would people not tell me the truth when I ask them?
Can we be real open about what an open door policy means for a second?
Yeah.
When you tell somebody, not you two, but when you tell somebody you've got an open door policy, what you're really telling them is, if you believe it's important enough, you can come to me. I'm not going to go seeking you out.
Right.
I'm not going to try to help you. I'm not going to make time out of my day. But my door is open. And if you have the courage to come see me when you think something is important enough to you, then if I'm not too busy, I'll do my best to try to help you. An open door policy sounds great, but in many ways it can be more demotivating than it is motivating. The unfortunate reality is the higher the title, the more power we have in any given situation, the more entitled we feel to other people's information and behavior, but the more entitled they feel to protect themselves.
Right.
And we think about consequences that could be having to work late, having to work on a job or a project I don't want to, having to do somebody else's job, having to work with another customer, not getting the promotion or the job that I want, on and on, right? These are all very real consequences that people experience every day. So if I have information and the CEO wants it, well, now I have to go through this scale and say, what are these things I do or don't want, and how and when does sharing this information impact my ability to land on the good or bad side of this scale? It has less to do initially with the leader as a human being as it does their title. So if we want to overcome the roadblocks that our titles create, the open door policy isn't enough. Don't ever walk by somebody without saying hello. End of conversation. It's not open for debate. At least smile and nod. Every time you walk by somebody and you don't acknowledge them, you tell them that you don't matter. Make sure that if we have a reason to praise somebody, we do it publicly and privately. People appreciate both. Publicly, sure, the rest of the organization can see it, but privately, it means more. If somebody makes a mistake, don't hammer them publicly. Handle it privately. But remember, these moments of mistakes are when people are the most vulnerable. Therefore, it is when our leadership or coaching can be the most impactful. So now if we use these mistakes in order to help somebody learn and build them up as opposed to tear them down, we can be more successful that way. This whole concept of control often works in reverse. The less control somebody has in a conversation, the more defensive they're going to be. So as a leader, the more control I can allow other people to feel, the more open and honest they're going to be with me, because the less afraid they are, the less power they feel is being taken from them, the more psychologically safe that they feel. So we were talking earlier before we started recording about the other book that I have to write, and I've been procrastinating and dragging my feet. If I just tell enough people I'm doing it, eventually I'll actually start doing it. But one of the core theses of the book is, far more often than not, if we go seeking information and we don't get it, it's our fault because of how we sought it out. We tend to blame it on the other person because don't they know who I am and it's my job and they need to do. No, they don't need to give you anything. They need to take care of themselves. So if we look at the lowest common denominator theory, if we have asked 10 people for information in the last week and all 10 of them weren't upfront and honest with us, what's the only thing those 10 conversations have in common?
They weren't
Us.
honest. Yeah.
And it's time that we look at re-examining how we're approaching people and talk about breaking pattern. It might be a behavioral shift over time that takes a few months to get people to start opening up. But until we make that shift, the results aren't going to change.
I love that. And I love your open office concept. I couldn't agree with you more. It's the funniest damn thing because it's one way. So it's really interesting as you're talking about the thing that popped into my head. I was listening to you, but the thing that popped into my head was my coach, a guy by the name of Mike Lamaro that I use at 2 companies. And Mike was a huge proponent of management by walking around. And he ran a large steel processing company. And he would take the time to do the opposite of the open door policy, which was go meet the organization where the organization's occurring. And then he would ask questions of people. So I guess my question of you is, if I have a feeling you probably like the management by walking around concept, but if you're an effective leader and you want to be really good at listening, like what are some of the questions you should be asking as a leader as you're meeting your team members where they operate, whether that's in the field on a construction site or in a retail environment or wherever that looks like? What are some of those questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I love the whole management by walking around for sure. Get out there, let people see you, make yourself available. For people who say, I don't have time for that, I don't want to swear in your podcast, but I generally have a vulgar response when they say I don't have time for that. I think everybody who runs a business knows that in order to make money, you've got to invest money. Well, in order to save time, you've got to invest time. So if I'm getting information too late and I'm being surprised and problems are bigger than they needed to be before I can solve them, it's because I haven't invested the time with my people so they feel comfortable giving me what I need to know when I need to know it. If you want to save time, we got to invest time. When it comes to asking the questions, I'll do this a couple different ways. My number one favorite question to ask people in most contexts is, please walk me through. The question, please walk me through, it's open and it gives people latitude and they can take it in lots of directions. Okay, cool. But it also implies chronological order. It also implies detail. So it gives me more to evaluate as they are giving me the answer. It gives them ownership as they're giving me the answer. Please walk me through the process. Please walk me through the situation. Please walk me through. That's one of my favorites. The other thing that I love to do, and we say this all the time, but I don't hear people giving lots of examples on how to do it. Like, focus on the issue, not the person.
Right.
Okay.
So if I was to say, Glenn, what difficulties are you having? None. I'm awesome. Why would I have any difficulties? And if
Do I look like I'm struggling? I'm okay. Yeah.
But now if I'm walking around and I say, hey, Glenn, I know this client has been particularly difficult with some of the last minute changes that we've had to make, and we've been juggling schedules. I'm curious, what would be the 3 largest obstacles that might stop us from hitting the deadline?
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't say what difficulties are you having. I used the illustrate before you investigate principle. So the first thing I did was I illustrated my understanding that the client hasn't been the easiest and we're juggling schedules. That's a face-saving excuse built into the question. Then instead of saying what difficulties are you having, now it is, what are the 3 obstacles that could stop us from hitting the deadline? I'm talking about obstacles. I'm not talking about you, which now makes it infinitely easier for you to open up and be honest. And I don't care if you give me 3 obstacles or you give me 1. If you give me anything that says, yeah, we might have difficulty with, now we can solve the problem together. And by the way, I use that. The client hasn't been easy. We've been juggling schedules. I'm curious. What do you think are the 3 largest obstacles that might stop us from hitting the deadline? And without hesitation, Glenn looks at me and goes, none. We're under control. I'm going to be done 2 days early. You can be rock solid certain that that is an honest answer because of how I asked the question. Whereas if I ask, are you going to hit the deadline? He says, yeah, of course I'm going to hit the deadline, 50-50.
Yeah.
How do I know? That's the implied expected answer. That's the answer he's supposed to give. So when we use the illustrate before you investigate principle, as we're walking around and talking to people, illustrate our understanding of things that are impacting their world. Please walk me through is one of my favorite questions. Real quick, I do not like help me understand. I'm not saying it's a terrible question, but it can come across as parental. Can you please help me understand? Like, you just walk me through instead of help me understand.
Yeah.
But then when I asked the question about the obstacles, about the issue, about the process, and not the person, take the word you out of the question.
Yep. Depersonalize it.
Now it's going to be easier for them to be honest. One of the other things is for a lot of the CEOs listening, I bet you came up in your business. If you run a manufacturing business, you probably came up in that business. If you run a sales team, you probably were in sales. If you run an engineering organization, I would bet my lunch budget this week that you are an engineer. So now you can illustrate before you investigate principle to the next level. And instead of saying in this situation, I know, now it can be, hey, I remember when I was working as an engineer full time, I would think I had a problem solved. And then I would realize that there were these other variables or factors I hadn't considered. I'm just curious, considering where we are in the process, what additional factors might we need to work in before we finalize the solution? So now I'm showing that personal vulnerability from a similar role, which makes it easier for other people to go, oh, damn, maybe I didn't think about this because I just gave you a time where I didn't think about something. So those would be the core components to walking around and engaging people in a way that encourages them to actually open up.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you. I love the help me understand thing. It's something that I've used a lot in my life. And as I think about like the asking of that question, I agree with you. It's almost parental in nature. It's like, you're beneath me. Help me understand why you didn't take the garbage out last night.
Yeah.
Which we want to get here, or we want to get on the same side of the table, not opposite side of the table. So I love that. That's great. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Michael, kind of on the same line, and one thing that struck me from our conversation before is the concept of shame. As individuals, we fear shame sometimes more than anything, and how that can get in the way of conversation, the truth, and how as leaders, or even just these persuasive conversations, if we can give that person, it's not about us being right, it's about us getting to the truth and us being able to give permission to the person we're talking to give us that truth over their needing to, not feel ashamed or protecting themselves.
So you waited till almost the end of the conversation to ask me about one of the most important things. I'm so glad you brought it up. So glad you brought it up. I would contend that not only is shame one of, it is perhaps, in fact, most likely, the single biggest fear that will stop adults from accepting risk. It's the fear of embarrassment. If we take anything away from this conversation, we should be going out of our way to help people not feel embarrassed. The story I told earlier about the woman. She was embarrassed that she'd had this information for a long time and didn't want to get in trouble now. She didn't want the CEO to think that she was dishonest. I could give any number of conversations that I've had, particularly coaching salespeople, where they've been embarrassed about a mistake they made, something they did or didn't do, and they were holding on to it, so we couldn't get past it. The short version, I was called to do a theft interrogation many years ago, and the HR person calls me, tells me that they don't have evidence, but they're sure this is the person. Yeah, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Okay, I show up. And before I do the interrogation, I'm talking to the HR person. What else do I need to know? What haven't we discussed? What are we missing? Nothing. To hurry up and get to the punchline, I've got this guy on the edge, and I can't figure out why he's not confessing. Like, everything he's saying and doing and showing me tells me this is a guy who should be confessing by now, and he's not. Finally, I was able to use an empathy story and get him over the line. He had a boxing glove necklace on. So I used the analogy of getting ready for a fight, but skipping leg day. And when you skip leg day, you end up getting tired in the 10th round and getting knocked out and losing a fight that you otherwise were up on the scorecards for. And I built that into an analogy on telling the truth, and thank God it worked. So he opens up and starts telling me the truth. Later on, grown man starts crying, and I just say, hey, man, I want to make sure that if there's anything additional I need to know or I can help you with, you'll let me know. He looks me in the face and tells me that he grew up babysitting for the HR manager. So confessing to me wasn't the problem. When he was younger, the HR manager paid him to babysit her kids. So now he's going to walk away with her knowing that he's a thief. So that level of embarrassment was a Jersey barrier between him telling me the truth and not. It is the number one thing. So when and where we have conversations is important. Like we talked about earlier, how we ask questions is important. How we use mistakes as learning and coaching opportunities, not excuses to beat up on somebody, is important. I would stand on a coffee table and scream that 90% of the battle to getting somebody to tell the truth, share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences, is allowing them to save face. And as CEOs, one of the things that tends to drive us up a wall sideways are when people give us excuses. They say, I'm sorry I did it because. I'm sorry I didn't do it because. We get super angry about what comes after the because without realizing what came before the because. They just said I did or didn't do it. They told you what you needed to hear. But the excuse was the face-saving, I can't even talk anymore. The face-saving mechanism that allowed them to do it. So we end up attacking the face-saving mechanism because we don't like it, which pushes them further away from the truth. Instead of realizing that that excuse is what allowed them to put it on the table, and we can't solve a problem that's not on the table. So when they say, I'm sorry, yeah, I made that mistake because I've just been overworked and pulled in a bunch of different directions, and I've got 5 different managers telling me to do 6 different things. Well, John, thank you. That's a great place to start. I didn't realize that the managers have been pulling you in that many different directions. Please take a minute. Walk me through all the things you've been asked to do. Just by responding to the excuse that way, the depth of truth that we're going to get out of this conversation can be measured in meters, as opposed to coming back and saying, our culture is to not make excuses and to be accountable. We need to do what? Yeah, well, congratulations. They're never going to tell you anything after.
That's great.
That's awesome.
And I love how even in that you used, walk me through versus help me understand. And I substituted in my head, and I could instantly feel how that conversation would change the tone of the conversation.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
If I may throw one thing in real quick, because I know
Please.
we're wrapping up time too. I believe, and there probably is research to this out there, I just haven't found it yet. I believe that the single biggest problem with communication in business, especially at the executive level, is we were all taught to communicate as children by adults who talk to us as if we were children. Then we grow up to be other adults who need to lead and influence other adults, but all we were ever taught to do is talk to kids. So we end up talking to adults like kids, wondering why it doesn't work and blaming it on them. And the help me understand question is just one small example of that.
For sure. It's very parental in nature.
This is a question, Michael, we ask, and I know you've got some really good insight here. So if you were writing this next version of the CEO playbook, what are 3 principles of communication or leadership that you would tell every CEO they should master?
Thank you. I'm going to start with this one. Assume that people have more motivation to withhold information than to share it.
Okay.
If I assume that Glenn's just going to open up and tell me and it turns out you're resistant, I'm way behind. If I assume that you're probably more likely to withhold, so I come up with a good strategy and it turns out you're just ready to tell me, then cool, I'm playing with house money. Assume people have more motivation to withhold information than to share it. Focus on outcomes. Want to stay present, want to stay patient, want to stay neutral, problem-solving mentality, learning mentality, value outcomes over emotions. Focus on outcomes. And number 3, Glenn, you asked it earlier, help people save face and protect their self-image. If you can assume people have more motivation to withhold, focus on outcomes, and help people save face and protect their self-image, you will be astounded with the information that people will share with you, the behavior changes that they'll commit to for you, and the success of the decisions you make as a result.
Super powerful.
All right.
Yeah, really
Those are
good.
great.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, I think we have time for one more story. And John, hopefully you don't shoot me for this, because I know you got to get going. But I love this story that you had shared when you spoke, and it was about the 2 brothers who worked together, and there were things disappearing out of that company, and you demonstrated a technique of communication and building rapport that you were able to get to the truth on that one. Could you share that story again? I love it.
I will. And I know it's been a long conversation, so people are like, oh, one more. And John, I know you got to go. So I'll do the Cliff Notes version. And I'd love to come back. And if you guys have me back,
right.
maybe I'll do the story in more
Yeah,
detail.
I'd love to have you back.
Very long story short, I get called into a theft case. They've got a suspect. They don't have any solid evidence. They've got some circumstantial evidence. I sit down to start the interview. I'm building rapport, and he tells me that his brother manages the loading dock. And to anybody that's ever worked in a building with a loading dock before, you know that the loading docks are ground zero for theft activity. So now I'm mad that I wasn't told this prior to when I got here, because apples don't fall far from trees. If this guy's stealing, the guy who runs the loading dock, his brother, is probably stealing too. So I'd rather be lucky than good, using our rapport-based techniques and our bread and butter, the WZ method. This guy admits to a whole ton of theft. I'm not saying he admitted to everything that he did. Usually they're shut-off valves, but he admitted to a bunch. And so now I get to a point where I'm like, okay, he's probably done, but I got to get him to snitch on his brother. And we're outside of New York City. This guy's covered in tattoos from his knuckles to his neck. I mean, so you can imagine kind of the environment that I'm in at the moment. So how do I get this guy to snitch? So I asked him, the first thing I said to him was, thank you very much for your honesty today. I really appreciate it. I got to tell you, I'm jealous of you. So I just told the guy that confessed to thousands of dollars worth of theft that I'm jealous of him. And I watched him look at me like I just grew 4 new heads. And I say to him, you see your brother every day? He says, yeah. I said, you work with him every day? He says, yeah, all the time. I said, man, I'm jealous. My brother's my best friend. He lives halfway across the country. I might see him twice a year. You see your brother every day. He sits up straight, he smiles, he nods his head. And I told him a true story. When I was going into the 3rd grade and John was going into the 1st, my dad walked us up the hill and gave us a big speech about starting tomorrow. You guys are in the real world together. You have to look out for each other. You have to take care of each other. Mom and dad aren't always going to be there. No matter what happens, it's John and Mike against the world. You guys are going to take care of each other. I don't know if my dad realized that that'd be like the one story John and I would remember word for word and adhere to for the rest of our lives. But everybody knew from then on that if Mike was there, John was on the way. If John was on the way, Mike was in the shadows. It was a 2-for-1, no matter what was going on. And I gave him a little bit of an example, and I ended it by saying this. And I walking out, if people are just listening and they can't see it, I took my thumb and I dragged it across my lip. So walking out of there, I thought to myself, well, that wasn't a great idea, but I didn't have a choice because John was there. I had to go. And when I said that, he nodded his head. And as soon as he nodded his head, I said, so keeping that in mind, what's the most expensive item you and your brother ever took off the loading dock together? He takes his arms out to his side, exhales, brings his arm back down to his hips and says the air compressor, and started snitching on his brother.
Oh,
And John, you talk about reframing. If I ask him, is your brother a thief? He's going to say, hell no.
Right.
If I ask him to snitch on his brother, he's going to say, F you.
Right.
But if I reframe it, that now it's not snitching, it's as a brother, I know you got to back a brother's play.
Yeah.
But when was the last time you backed your brother's play? I framed it around backing up your brother, not around being a thief, and got an additional 20 grand or whatever it was in theft activity by the end of the conversation. So it's an investigative example. It's not a business example, but that is using all of the principles that we talked about today.
That's awesome. Michael, Glenn, thank you for our time today. Michael was great. I learned a lot. If you're a listener, we hope you enjoyed the time together with Michael. Please subscribe. And if you are a CEO or leader in need of coaching, please feel free to reach out to Glenn or I. We'd be happy to help. Thank you.